States Supreme Court for 23 years. The law firm of Amer, Cunningham, Brennan, providing legal services for over 60 years, committed to restoring public confidence in the legal profession.
I've got some startling news about your life insurance. Many people don't know it, but the premiums for the same coverage can differ widely from company to company. Well, there's an organization called Best Quote that will do the shopping for you for free. A 35-year-old non-smoking male can get $250,000 worth of coverage for about $16 a month. Call Best Quote now for your free comparison and find out why over 100,000 people have used Best Quote to shop for life insurance.
Remembering 15 years in the Crossfire on Larry King Live tonight.
Live from the Dorothy Betts Theater on the campus of the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. A special edition of Crossfire. On the left, Bill Press. On the right, Pat Buchanan. In the Crossfire, Nixon personal attorney Leonard Garment and Nixon White House counsel John Dean.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire from George Washington University. At this very hour, June 17, 1972, 5 burglars with close ties to the White House were making final plans to break into headquarters of the Democratic National Committee located in the Watergate Hotel. Today, 25 years later, after 40 people were indicted, after 19 former Nixon officials went to prison, after President Nixon resigned in disgrace, today Watergate still lives in public distrust of government and of the media, lives in public resignation to White House scandals. There have been so many of them since. And Watergate lives in former Nixonites still defending their own roles in the Nixon White House. 2 of them join us tonight. Former White House counsel John Dean, who testified against the president but says he warned him first.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it.
We're also joined by former White House counsel Leonard Garment, who stood with Nixon to the very end. So tonight, in the Crossfire, what is the lesson of Watergate? Is it that all politicians are crooks, or that, no matter how big a crook, our democracy survives? And who is Deep Throat anyway? Could he have been former Nixon speechwriter Pat Buchanan?
I like it. I'm not the man, Bill. John Dean, according to an earlier interview I think you've given this week, you said that no one in our White House at the time of the break-in, including the president, knew or had prior knowledge of the break-in.
That's correct.
Why in heaven's name, John, did they then bring it into the White House and get involved and ensnared in a cover-up of a minor crime that nobody was even involved in? Why didn't they cut those fellows loose?
Good question. And I think there was some talk about that, but the problem was they couldn't cut the fellows loose because they had done another burglary while they were at the White House, the same players. And that ensnared everybody in that whole process. So there was an instant decision to cover up.
Who were the ones that basically dragged the President of the United States into the cover-up?
I don't think anybody dragged him in. The first note I've seen on the thing, sort of record, is a conversation between Haldeman and Magruder where he said, you know, make it as confusing as possible and get back to Washington as quickly as you can.
Let me ask you about, and a lot of these folks, the young folks, probably don't know these names, but Haldeman was the president's chief of staff. He's the protector of the president. Why didn't he say, look, you guys went out there and did it, we had nothing to do with it, and keep this thing away from the President of the United States?
Well, that was the initial thought, that the White House could isolate itself, could contain itself, keep themselves out of it, and some of the early decisions that have been interpreted as covering up the break-in really weren't covering up the break-in. They were covering up what had happened in the White House that might well have been national security, for that matter.
Len Garment, let me ask you, I mean, there's this effort to sort of separate Nixon from what happened, but in July 1971, before this break-in, we just learned from the latest tapes that were released, there was a break-in at the Brookings Institution.
Wrong.
And Nixon said there was an attempt. Here's what Nixon said.
No attempt. There was talk about it.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the correction.
Okay.
There was a plan to, but here's what Nixon said. Is that clear? Did they get the Brookings Institute raided last night? Get it done. I want it done. Now, my question to you is, since we know he knew about that little operation or idea of, why shouldn't we believe that he knew about Watergate from the beginning?
Well, there's no evidence that he knew about Watergate from the beginning, number one. That's important. Number two, and this is important, Bill, Richard Nixon was forever ordering things that were not done. And he did that in
it says a lot about his presidency.
Well, it says a lot about almost any presidency. Presidents are human beings. And if they get really in a rage over something, they'll say, do this and do that, do the other thing. Some of them are really quite strange. That's why they try to have, that's why Nixon in particular was sure to have around him people who understood when he was serious and when he wasn't. Kissinger, Haldeman, Ehrlichman. Charles Colson got into that mix. Now, one example, Bill. I think this will be brief.
Real quickly.
We got it.
I look at each other.
I understand. And this is very typical. It's just Henry Kissinger has told this story many times. After Syria went into Jordan with its tanks in Black September, 1971, Nixon was lashed up about that because he was trying to work out some stable arrangement in the Middle East. And in the middle of the night, Henry Kissinger had a phone call in his pajamas and sleeping, and the phone rang, jangled, the presidential phone, and Nixon said, "Now, Henry, I want you to call the Joint Chiefs together tomorrow. I want a massive strike on Syria. I want you to arrangements for the bombing of Damascus. Now, I don't want to hit you with anything about that. That's to be done." And Henry Kissinger said, "Get some rest, Mr. President." The next day, nothing was done. Nothing was ever said about that.
All right, but Mr. Garment,
that happened 1,000 times.
One quick question.
Indeed.
When it all started to fall apart, Len, when it all started to fall apart, John Dean.
Call me Len, please.
I called you Len. When it all started to fall apart, John Dean had the sense to leave. Why didn't you?
Well, John Dean had the sense to leave because he was pleading with he was going to the prosecutor. No, he wasn't pleading yet. John Dean went to the prosecutors, and of course he, as we know, lamentably went to jail ultimately because he was indeed one of the architects of the technical aspects of the cover-up.
Well, let me get John Dean in this.
Why didn't I have the sense? I had no desire to leave. I felt that that Richard Nixon was doing something a little bit more important than what was happening at that time in Watergate, and I didn't know that he was guilty of anything.
Okay, John, let's take following up on what Len said. You know, there's a lot of beer talk in there, and things were not done. There were things written on the news summary, you know, about something happened, bomb them would be written on the news summary, you know, coming back to me. And everybody knew it was nonsense. Well, let me ask you about the so-called enemies list. The 20 names, I think, that you got up, right?
Did not.
All right, you did not. All right, let's take the enemies list, whoever got it up. Was there anything, to your knowledge, ever done to people on that enemies list, like Mary McGrory and Daniel Shore, that remotely compared with what Lyndon Johnson and the FBI did to Dr. Martin Luther King when they wiretapped him, photographed his bedroom, and then took that and gave it to the press, and then also they sent it to his wife? I mean, did Nixon ever do anything to an enemy like that?
And who authorized that tap?
Let me cut that
Bobby
short.
Kennedy.
Now you got it.
I don't know of anything, I know of no action taken against anybody on the enemies list. I think it was one of the most overplayed episodes.
It was it came out of the White House.
I agree, it was just people putting stuff in files.
What happened is it came out in my testimony before the Senate. And as a result of it, it got tremendous media attention, and it became a celebrated event to be on the Nixon enemy list, if you recall at the time.
I had friends in the press call me up and say, "Why didn't you put me on the list? It was good for a $5,000 raise."
Yeah, sorry I didn't make it.
I mean, this is what you're saying now is the truth. This whole enemies list thing was nonsense. Nothing was ever done.
I've always
just
said this.
Everybody that said something negative was name was put in, didn't get invited to a White House party.
The things that you said of that sort, nobody ever reported. They wanted to hear dirt from you.
Len, Pat wants to change the subject. I want to talk about Watergate. I want to talk about the tapes. You had a chance. You were White House counsel. Why didn't you destroy those tapes when you had a chance to destroy them?
Well, I didn't particularly want to go to jail. It was an obstruction of justice to...
Early on, it would not have been, right?
I didn't know anything about them early on. Rocky, well, no. It wasn't a question of my destroying the tapes. I hadn't heard the tapes. I didn't have access to them. They were in the custody of the Secret Service. The question was, could the president direct somebody
Right.
to destroy the tapes? Should he? Could he? What was the law? And I, as counsel, I looked at the law and said it would be an obstruction of justice, Mr. President. And while they can't try you and indict you and put you in jail for that, you'd have to be impeached. It could be the first article in a bill of impeachment.
Early on, before the CIA had them, whatever, if he had destroyed the tapes, do you think he would have survived, John?
Probably.
Len?
Probably. I think he would have.
Survived badly wounded. John, did you talk to Richard Nixon before his death, or try to?
The last conversation I had with Richard Nixon was on Easter of 1973 when he called me to tell me, John, you're still my counsel.
Well, I remember I talked to... I know Nixon tried several times to talk to Vice President Agnew before his death, and Agnew never responded, but he went out to his funeral. Did you ever you never try to get in touch with him, or he never tried to get in touch with you?
I didn't think he would want to speak with me at the time.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any fresh ideas on who Deep Throat might be?
Not...
Present company excluded.
I don't think any of us know. In fact, one of the interesting things, the last conversation I had with Bob Woodward on this subject was that, because I have made a run at it and thought I, at one point, had figured it out, but I was wrong. I thought it was Al Haig. Woodward told me, we were talking about it, I said, it's surprising how little Deep Throat really knew as opposed to how much he knew. And there's a myth that he had all the answers, knew all of the moves.
This is ready nonsense. By quick, a one-word response, who do you think it was?
Bob Woodward. In other words...
He made it up?
Okay, we can't go. Listen, when we come back, we're going to go to our...
composite.
It was a composite? Okay. It was a composite. When we come back, we'll go to our studio audience for their questions on Watergate.
From the right, this is Bob Dole, wishing Crossfire a happy 15th birthday. I know there'll be many more happy returns, because as long as there's politics, there'll be Crossfire.
Jerry's one of the toughest opponents you'd ever want to face. But she did lose 49 states.
For 15 years, politics' most epic battles have been fought on Crossfire.
Pat's a perfect gentleman off the air. But on the air?
Now get in the action in the Crossfire 15th Anniversary Sweepstakes. Win 2 exciting days flying real air-to-air combat. Look for details in USA Today. Then watch for the Crossfire Time Machine weeknights at 7:30 and test your skills in the Crossfire. Brought to you by Nortel. Do you have a power network?
And you give me one instance of the Communist Party of the United States engaging in repression in this country and not participating in the struggle against repression. If you read your history, you
give me one example.
Recognize that the Communist Party has played a major role in the struggle against racism.
You give me one example in history where the Communist Party has come to power where it has not imposed a repression that is as odious or far worse than the system it replaced.
Tickets. I need tickets. Good seats, huh?
Send him in, but this better be good.
I want to read the 23 on his shoes.
Let me tell you about WorldCom's Intellinet service.
Let me tell you, we need data transmission capabilities.
No problem.
And I need...
Tickets!
Detailed billing. Local service?
Tick, 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 tick.
We want to be supported by local reps.
I'm big on a system.
No matter what you need, WorldCom can do it all, unless what you need is...
Tickets!
WorldCom. One company, a world of solutions.
Glamorous Hollywood? Not to me. For me, it's long hours and strange locations. Can't get slowed down by irregularity. My doctor says exercise, eat right. But sometimes a meal is whatever you can grab between takes. My doctor suggested Metamucil, the only leading brand with 100% natural fiber, like the fiber in healthy foods. Keeps me regular, gently, so I can give my usual award-winning performance.
Metamucil, the doctor's natural choice for regularity.
When Tokyo
Tokyo Electric Power turned to GE for its advanced turbine technology, it gave Tokyo the largest, most efficient power plant of its kind in the world, which means more jobs for people back home and a better future for the people of Japan.
My grandfather worked for International Paper for 35 years. My dad has worked there for 20 years, and my mom for 21 years. As long as there's people like my mom and dad looking after trees, there'll always be lots of trees. But I'm not sure that I want to work for the company. I really want to be a stand-up comedian.
International Paper. We answer to the world.
Have you heard the one about the tree surgeon?
Welcome back. It's the 15th anniversary of Crossfire, and the issue is Watergate, and our guests are two former Nixon counsels, John Dean, whose testimony to the Watergate Committee in the summer of 1973 exposed the cover-up that led to the breaking of the Nixon presidency, and Leonard Garment, a Nixon law partner and friend who was with Nixon to the end in August of 1974. Bill?
All right, Pat, our first question is for somebody who knows about palace intrigue. He is Oleg, and he's here from Russia. Oleg. First question to
Mr. Garment.
Mr. Garment.
Mr. Garment, do you think that Whitewater may be as politically damaging to President Clinton as Watergate was to President Nixon?
I doubt it.
Thank you, sir.
There may be very serious revelations when the independent counsel reports involving foreign money and the quid pro quo for changes in foreign policy. It may be all kinds of things, but we don't know that. And unless it is very heavy and concrete, I don't think because he's a different kind of personality, and he doesn't have the Vietnam history and all of that.
John from New Mexico, your question for John Dean.
Yes. I'm wondering if Nixon had simply admitted what he did to the nation and apologized for it, could he have remained president? And as White House counsel at that time, if you think he could have done that, why didn't you counsel him to do that?
Well, first, I didn't really have access to the president until very late in my relationship with him. I was sort of a middle-level staff man with a big title. The answer is yes. I think there were many opportunities when Nixon could have come forward with to a degree and to what he thought was appropriate, particularly saying some of this was national security, and probably survived.
That was his big mistake, John. The major mistake was that Nixon decided to handle the matter politically rather than dealing with it as a matter that should be dealt with openly and get rid of it, including the break-in to Dr. Fielding's office, Ellsberg's psychiatrist.
But, you know, excuse me, the problem was all this stuff sitting on the tapes, and he should have just burned the tapes and said, go ahead and do what you want.
Two things. Pat Buchanan, Pat, you were right when we were preparing the May 22nd statement. You said on Ellsberg, Mr. President, I mean indirectly through Fred Buzard, who was going down to the President's office, Mr. President, tell the President that I think he should bite the bullet on that and take credit for it. And he said, well, I just can't take credit for it. I don't remember doing it.
Got another question here for Len Garment from Joe, Villa Park, California.
All right. You mentioned non-serious threats like bombing Syria. Even though you said these were non-serious, how do you think they reflect President Nixon's decision-making process as president?
Well, I think his decision-making process was damn good. I mean, he built, over a period of 3 years, he and Henry Kissinger formed one of the great trifectas, that's a racing term, in American foreign policy history. Gradually made a strategic withdrawal from Vietnam, painfully, slowly, without losing the ability to negotiate with China, and also to deal with the Soviet Union. All of those things were coming to a head in the spring of 1972 when all hell broke loose on Vietnam, which also, it seems to me, tends to explain why he made the decision. It's not worth throwing everything in when I've got all of this on the table, because it's going to be, the consequences will be ghastly, and they were.
Sanjay from Boston, your question for John Dean.
Mr. Dean, I'd like to know how you would respond to the following statement that the only difference between Nixon and every president that preceded him and every president that's followed him is that Nixon got caught and the others didn't.
I've heard that a few times, and there is... at one point, the president asked me to go back and dig around to see what I could find in dirty linen that had happened in the past. And I was able to actually get a hold of some people over in the FBI, and it was not attractive stuff. But what I found is there was a big difference. What had become an exception to the rule in prior presidents had become a standard procedure and almost a mentality and a way of thinking in the Nixon White House.
John,
and I think that's one of the differences between prior presidencies.
John, Vic Lasky wrote the book, It Didn't Start with Watergate. Look, Lyndon Johnson, and he's dead, but look, he came to town penniless, and he died a millionaire, $42 million, having spent his life on the public. Could he have survived the kind of press hostility, the interrogation from Capitol Hill with the Bobby Baker, the Martin Luther King stuff? Could he have survived all that stuff? Or, I mean, weren't they really out to get Richard Nixon, and he gave him the sword?
I don't think there is any question that Richard Nixon had a reservoir of ill will to draw from, and drew deeply.
Well, can I, John, forgive me, but let's talk about the magnitude of, quote, moral crimes in the presidency. We now know, as a result of tapes and other documents released, that Lyndon Johnson had concluded in 1964 that Vietnam could not be won, that our position was hopeless, that it was a mess, that there was going to be endless bloodshed, but for political reasons, this is not a joke. I mean, I'm not making this up. He decided he's got to stay in there, and that resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands and the injury of hundreds of thousands of others. And then all of that led, ultimately, when Nixon lost his power, and the Congress denied 1 cent of the $700 million that was needed to support the Paris Peace Treaty, that led to endless deaths in Vietnam and Cambodia.
All right, Len, no saints there. We know it. Len Garment,
but we're talking about magnitude of evil.
I think Richard Nixon holds his own when you talk about magnitude of evil. Thank you, Len Garment, for joining us this evening.
I disagree
John
with you.
Dean, thank you. That's what makes Crossfire. Thank you, John Dean, for joining us. And when we come back, it's Pat Buchanan and me with our closing comments.
Messaging. Direct Connect, two-way radio for instant contact.
Time's been changed to 3. Call Wilson right away.
Got it.
Right, 3.
And digital cellular for the ultimate in wireless security.
The time's been moved to 3.
On my way.
Nextel lets you accomplish even the most difficult business objectives.
Let's do it.
Get smart. Get Nextel, the national all-digital wireless network.
In the beginning, the world was one big global market. Then the continents split apart. Landmass separated from landmass. Nation separated from nation. And international trade became almost impossible. Then businesses began moving to Fairfax County, Virginia, and the trend was reversed. Regular international flights and global communications networks brought the world closer. And by the 21st century, it was one big global market again.
I don't know. Never thought much about retiring. Figured I'd know when the time was right.
We're gonna miss you, Ted.
36 years. Started on DC-6s. Pretty much everything you needed to work on one, you found in the toolbox. Today, we use ultrasounds to check for microscopic voids. Use X-rays, fluoroscopes, magnetic imaging. Yeah, the tools have changed, but the job really hasn't. Ask anybody out here. They'll tell you. We're not just responsible for these planes. We're responsible for the people who get on them as well. That's the way it's always been. I'm proud to say for the past 36 years, I've been a small part of that.
Way to go, Ted.
New merchandise daily. 2 patents every 24 hours. Internet, software, wireless innovations, direct from designer, Bell Labs. Thousands of breakthroughs in stock. More arriving today. We never close. Lucent Technologies. We make the things that make communications work.
Hello, I'm Leon Harris at the CNN Center in Atlanta. And coming up next on Prime News, you've heard the verdict in the Timothy McVeigh trial by now.
Well, now a live interview with one of the jurors who helped decide McVeigh's fate. Also ahead tonight, unraveling the mystery of Gulf War illness. Does a new report hold the answers? Join me for those stories and much more coming up after Crossfire's closing comments.
Tonight on CNN's Larry King Live, Crossfire, a CNN original celebrating 15 years of the left and the right locking horns. We'll celebrate with the whole Crossfire gang tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Talks continue on the balanced budget plan as both houses...
Russia and NATO signed a historic agreement that formally ends the Cold War and redesigns the
confidence in the economy soared to a 28-year high in May as the Nikkei average continues its fall. NASA says...
On May 31st, an event occurred that went far beyond yesterday's news. Because May 31st was day one of a firm created for the express purpose of taking care of all your financial needs tomorrow.
The usual trim, Mr. B? Yeah, and tossing a plan to get my networks running like those cars. No problem. Got to transform your disparate legacy networks into an integrated multimedia asynchronous transfer mode, IP, or frame relay Nortel power network.
Like they did at Indy this year. It can increase performance, increase flexibility, increase business.
Amen, Verge.
Nortel introduces power networks designed to move business at the speed of Indy.
Mean you don't have a power network? Bright guy like you?
People like to go places. Town hall, the ball game. That's why we invented cellular. Now we're perfecting more advanced wireless systems, wireless office systems, and even cordless phones. So you can go even more places. Lucent Technologies. We make the things that make communications work.
Closing Comments is brought to you by Lucent Technologies. We make the things that make communications work.
Okay. Bill, there's no doubt about it. I was in the White House. Things were done wrong, and Nixon did them wrong. But I think he got pretty much lynched for rustling a few ponies by some of the worst horse thieves in the country.
Pat, I think he was the worst horse thief in the history of this country. Look, there's this big effort to rehabilitate Richard Nixon. I don't buy it. I mean, he got into office by red baiting. He used the powers of the office to debase the presidency and try to bring down our rule of law. He's the most disgraced president in the United States history, and let him remain that way in the history books.
You know, in 1972, Richard Nixon defeated your friends with a 49-state landslide, 60% of the vote. He did it. He had peace with honor in Vietnam. And you guys hated and detested him, and he slipped and made a mistake, and you were on him like a pack of dogs. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone.
Does not make
and
him
your guys aren't that good a shape.
He is still Tricky Dick to me. From the left, I'm Bill Press. Good night for Crossfire.
We'll give you a rematch tomorrow night. From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.
Nixon lives.
To access CNN Interactive on the World Wide Web, call 1-800-WORLDNET, extension CNN, for free Internet software.
Closed captioning was provided by Bell Atlantic, the heart of communication.
Wednesday, was the CIA involved in dealing drugs? Or has America gone conspiracy crazy? The American Edge, Wednesday, 10 Eastern on CNN.
How do most car dealers react when you ask for the lowest price? Wide selection? Immediate delivery? How about great lease deals? Trade-in value? Confidence and trust? Bet they don't even know your name. Must drive you clear out of your tree. If we were you, we'd shop at Kent Lincoln Mercury.
Heart disease is a family illness. It makes an impact on the entire family. That's why it takes a family to help you recover. The Summa family. From testing through surgical and non-surgical procedures to rehabilitation and recovery, the Summa family of experts will help you build a healthier heart for exceptional cardiac care. Summa, your partner in good health.
This is it, the one you've been waiting for, the Shadell Interiors Warehouse Sale. Save up to 70% on truckloads of sofas and chairs, bedrooms and mattresses, dinettes and dining rooms, leather furniture, tables of all shapes and sizes, hundreds of pictures and lamps, accessory items, and much more. 2 days only, Saturday, June 21st and Sunday, June 22nd. Only at our Canal Place warehouse located at 111 West Barges Street, downtown Akron. Don't miss the chance to buy Shadell quality at the lowest prices of the year. 2 days only, June 21st and 22nd. Call 867-6100 for more information.
Don't wait for the coach to give you the green light. You can be part of the history and excitement of the Baseball All-Star Game at Jacobs Field. Thanks to Time Warner Cable, the Classic Sports Network, and Stambaugh, you could be the winner of a pair of tickets to the 1997 All-Star Game. Hurry into Stambaugh's and enter to win. Stop in at any of these fine Stambaugh's locations.
My client, Mr. Goldman, seeks only to enforce this judgment, not to get a dime of Mr. Simpson's money, but to see that Mr. Simpson bear some of the responsibility and the punishment that the jury said he should bear for murdering 2 people.
But if they take Simpson's assets, will he take responsibility?
If it wasn't for the pension and Social Security, it should be very, I don't know how we wouldn't make it.
When you're ready to collect your pension, will you get everything you have coming to you? Also ahead, have you been wondering about the jurors who decided Timothy McVeigh's fate? Well, meet the man who led them tonight on Prime News.
From the CNN World Headquarters in Atlanta, Prime News with Joey Chin and Leon Harris.
Good evening. It's Joey Chen's turn to have a night off. Our top story tonight, 4 months after O.J. Simpson was found responsible for the deaths of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman, plaintiffs still haven't collected on the $33 million civil judgment. Well, the attorneys were back in court today trying to resolve the problem, and CNN's Greg Lamont joins us now live from Los Angeles with the very latest. Greg?
Well, Leon, will O.J. Simpson ever play golf again? Well, one of his attorneys says he will not. In fact, attorneys for O.J. Simpson, the family of Ron Goldman, and the estate of Nicole Brown Simpson took their gloves off today in a court proceeding designed to determine how much of O.J. Simpson's seized property will ultimately be auctioned off. Back in March, Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies seized up to more than 100 items from O.J. Simpson's Brentwood estate, including golf bags, area rugs, lamps, sports memorabilia, including trophies and plaques. Today, attorneys were in court haggling over which of those items would be up for grabs and which ones Simpson would be able to hang on to. In many instances, Simpson, who wasn't at the court proceeding today, claimed that the items were exempted from the damage against him when it was ruled that he was responsible for the death of his ex-wife and Ron Goldman.
If you just read Mr. Simpson's examination, as well as Mr. Taft's examination, it is clear that they will do everything in their power to prevent my client from enforcing even 1 cent of this judgment. That is absolutely clear from all of their behavior so far.
Is your client trying to frustrate Mr. Goldman's efforts to recover anything? Obviously, if the Browns recover, it stays in his family.
I am.
You are?
Yes. Because that's my position as his counsel. I will vigorously defend my client under the law in every fashion that is ethical and moral and follows the law.
And that means trying to frustrate Mr. Goldman?
Well, if the net result is to frustrate Mr. Goldman, then so be it. My objective is not, my objective is to follow the law and protect to the maximum degree possible my client's assets, and that's what I will do.
Among the items not litigated today was O.J. Simpson's Heisman Trophy. The one you see is a replica that's displayed at USC. Attorneys in the courtroom indicated that it was valued at as much as $400,000. Simpson says it is not in his possession. He says instead it is in a trust for the children. Next week, the validity of that trust will be discussed. The biggest fight waged by the attorneys for O.J. Simpson was over 6 golf bags and 51 clubs. In fact, the attorney said that these were very important items to Mr. Simpson, but the judge saw it another way. He said that O.J. Simpson could not keep the 6 golf bags and the 51 clubs, although he said he might listen to some more argument next week. Simpson was allowed to keep $6,000 worth of artwork, but he lost expensive lamps, area rugs, trophies, and some plaques. Simpson's house also is in foreclosure, and there could be a trustee's sale as early as next month. This court proceeding in regards to O.J. Simpson's seized assets will continue next Monday. Leon?
All right. Greg Lamont reporting live this evening from Los Angeles. Thanks much. Talk to you soon. The Pentagon is downplaying a new congressional report that suggests exposure to chemical weapons may be the cause of health problems.
Barber County, that in the southern portion of Kansas, baseball-sized hail. Ponca City, that's right along the border there. We've seen wind gusts as high as 70 miles an hour. We've also seen the heavy rainfall, as much as 2 inches there. Well, what does it look like in our forecast picture? Well, pretty much from Texas all the way across the southeast, here come the thunderstorms rumbling around. And our computer models are suggesting 2 to 4 inches of rainfall, certainly possible. So lots of moisture associated with this and not moving out very fast either. So we could see the potential for some flooding through this region. How about...
Who testified against the president but says he warned him first.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency. And if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it.
We're also joined by former White House counsel Leonard Garment, who stood with Nixon to the very end. So tonight, in the Crossfire, what is the lesson of Watergate? Is it that all politicians are crooks, or that, no matter how big a crook, our democracy survives? And who is Deep Throat anyway? Could he have been former Nixon speechwriter Pat Buchanan?
I'm not the man, Bill. John Dean, according to an earlier interview I think you've given this week, you said that no one in our White House at the time of the break-in, including the president, knew or had prior knowledge of the break-in.
That's correct.
Why in heaven's...
United States Supreme Court for 23 years. The law firm of Amer, Cunningham, Brennan, providing legal services for over 60 years, committed to restoring public confidence in the legal profession.
I've got some startling news about your life insurance. Many people don't know it, but the premiums for the same coverage can differ widely from company to company. Well, there's an organization called Best Quote that will do the shopping for you for free. A 35-year-old non-smoking male can get $250,000 worth of coverage for about $16 a month. Call Best Quote now for your free comparison and find out why over 100,000 people have used Best Quote to shop for life insurance.
Remembering 15 years in the Crossfire on Larry King Live tonight.
Live from the Dorothy Betts Theater on the campus of the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. A special edition of Crossfire.
Look, you guys went out there and did it. We had nothing to do with it. And keep this thing away from the President of the United States.
Well, that was the initial thought, that the White House could isolate itself, could contain itself, keep themselves out of it. And some of the early decisions that have been interpreted as covering up the break-in really weren't covering up the break-in. They were covering up what had happened in the White House that might well have been national security, for that matter. Len Garment, let me ask you, I mean, there's this effort to sort of separate Nixon from what happened, but in July 1971, before this break-in, we just learned from the latest tapes that were released, there was a break-in at the Brookings Institution.
Wrong.
And Nixon said there was an attempt. Here's what Nixon said.
No attempt. There was talk about it.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the correction.
Okay.
There was a plan to, but here's what Nixon said. Is that clear? Did they get the Brookings Institute raided last night? Get it done. I want it done. Now, my question to you is, since...
On the left, Bill Press. On the right, Pat Buchanan. In the Crossfire, Nixon personal attorney Leonard Garment and Nixon White House counsel John Dean.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire from George Washington University. At this very hour, June 17, 1972, 5 burglars with close ties to the White House were making final plans to break into headquarters of the Democratic National Committee located in the Watergate Hotel. Today, 25 years later, after 40 people were indicted, after 19 former Nixon officials went to prison, after President Nixon resigned in disgrace, today Watergate still lives in public distrust of government and of the media, lives in public resignation to White House scandals. There have been so many of them since. And Watergate lives in former Nixonites still defending their own roles in the Nixon White House. 2 of them join us tonight. Former White House counsel John Dean.
His name, John, did they then bring it into the White House and get involved and ensnared in a cover-up of a minor crime that nobody was even involved in. Why didn't they cut those fellows loose?
Good question. And I think there was some talk about that, but the problem was they couldn't cut the fellows loose because they had done another burglary while they were at the White House, the same players. And that ensnared everybody in that whole process. So there was an instant decision to cover up.
Who were the ones that basically dragged the President of the United States into the cover-up?
I don't think anybody dragged him in. The first note I've seen on the thing, sort of record, is a conversation between Haldeman and Magruder where he said, you know, make it as confusing as possible and get back to Washington as quickly as you can.
Let me ask you about, a lot of these folks, the young folks probably don't know these names, but Haldeman was the President's Chief of Staff. He's the protector of the President. Why didn't he say, look,